The wind cut like a knife that morning. It sliced right through the thin cotton shawl draped over her shoulders and chilled the old sweat clinging to her skin under the dress. The prairie rolled out flat and endless, worn down to bare dirt by the hard season. Nothing stirred except the dry grass rattling under her hem. Behind her on the splintered bench sat her 3 little ones, slumped in heavy sleep, mouths slack, eyelashes fluttering with whatever dreams still held them. Rose Harlan had carried them as far as her strength would allow. The wagon wheel had shattered a full week back. The mule went lame 3 days later and never got up again. The last settlement had shoved her on her way with nothing but a chunk of stale cornbread and a curt order to keep walking. Folks said the next town lay 2 full days ahead on foot. She'd covered nearly 1, her arms burning from hauling the baby the whole way. Little Ben Cole weighed no more than a feed sack, yet he felt impossible to hold, twisting in his sleep, whimpering for milk or comfort she no longer had to give. Her hands shook. Yesterday she'd torn open her palm, wrenching a rusty nail from the wrecked wagon to patch the sole of her boot. The bleeding had slowed, but never really stopped. A dark stain seeped through the rag she'd wrapped tight around it. She dropped down beside the road where a few skinny cottonwoods stood bare and bowed, shaped by decades of wind. Her kids had drifted off in the thin shade of one brittle tree whose branches groaned overhead like they still remembered green leaves and birds. She watched them now. Dust smeared across their lips, cheeks hollowed out. Lila Ford, the oldest girl, gripped her baby brother's tiny foot as if she were still on watch. High above the ridge, a buzzard drifted in slow, patient circles. It wheeled once more. Rose pushed herself upright, legs buckling. Her knees refused to lock. She rocked, grabbed the branch to steady herself. Her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. She hadn't taken a sip since first light, hoarding the last drops for the children. The canteen lay under the blanket, bone dry anyway. Then she heard it. Not thunder, not hoofbeats at first. Just a low vibration rising out of the earth, the sound heavy things make when they get close. She turned her head slow. A lone rider coming in on the sun-blinded road, still far off but closing steady. The horse looked lean and tough, coat pale with trail dust, like it had been pushed hard for miles. The man rode hunched a little in the saddle, hat pulled low, face lost in shadow. Rose didn't budge. Neither did the buzzard. The rider pulled rein about 20 long steps away and sat quiet for a beat. He studied her first, then the sleeping kids, then back to her. His coat was threadbare at the shoulders. One sleeve showed a clumsy stitch near the cuff. Those boots had walked through 15 hard winters at least. The horse blew out a snort and scraped a hoof against the cracked earth. Rose looked up at him, throat so tight no sound would come. Fear had burned out of her long ago. All that remained was a dry, hollow shell smoothed by too many miles. He glanced at the children again. Then he swung down with a low grunt, slapped the dust off his palms, walked over, and knelt beside the sleeping boy. He said nothing at first, just looked at the small face like he was reading trail signs. Then his eyes lifted to hers. Steady. Yours? He asked. She gave a single nod, jaw locked against the sharp knot rising in her chest. He eased back on his heels, arms loose at his sides. I can carry them, he said, voice low and even. Rose blinked, not sure the words had reached her right. All of them, he repeated. If you can sit the saddle. Her voice cracked from days of silence. You ridin' alone? No one with me, ma'am. He squinted towards the far horizon where the wind twisted red dust into lazy spirals. Why? His face carried deep grooves, the kind carved by hard years, though he couldn't have been past 35. A thin white scar traced his jawline, and a quiet weariness sat behind his eyes, one that didn't come from long trails alone. "Folks get left behind sometimes," he said low. "Other times, they just walk off on their own." He stepped toward the kids, hands careful and sure as he scooped up the baby first, nestling little Ben Cole against his chest. The boy fussed once, then eased back into sleep. The man glanced over his shoulder at her. "You got a name?" She paused, throat tight. "Rose," she finally managed. He dipped his chin once. "Cole Boone." Then he turned toward the horse. Somehow she managed to follow. The gelding shifted under the extra load but stayed calm. Cole worked slow and steady, fashioning the blanket into a makeshift sling to cradle Ben against his chest, then bending to lift Lila Ford. She stirred just enough to whisper her brother's name before sinking back into dreams. He held her the way a man does when he's carried children before. Not like it was nothing, but like it was second nature. Rose gathered the middle one, Jack Reed, herself. Her arms howled in protest as she lifted him, but she clamped her lips shut and said nothing. Cole steadied her as she climbed into the saddle, mindful not to wake the boy too much. She felt the small furnace of Jack's body through her thin dress, his breath carrying the faint smell of cornmeal and little boy sweat. Her head swam. The horse let out a low groan as Cole swung up behind her, one strong hand braced at the small of her back, Lila draped carefully across his lap. She braced for a crude remark, a sly tone, anything, but it never came. His quiet felt almost holy, like he was handling something made of glass. The sun was dropping west now, painting the flatland in molten gold. Behind them, the wind swept their tracks clean almost before they settled. No one said a word for miles. The steady roll of the horse lulled the children deeper into sleep. Rose stared straight ahead, eyes stinging but dry. She figured she ought to feel scared, or at least wary. Instead, she felt only a strange, hollow space inside, not the empty ache of loss, but the open quiet of something waiting to be filled. The country shifted as they rode. The road pinched down to a single rut, then forked into faint deer trails winding through short grass. Trees thickened ahead, cottonwoods thinning out, giving way to scrub oak and sycamore. Jagged rocks pushed up through the dirt here and there like broken teeth. The sky stayed wide but lost its glare. Cole nodded toward a narrow ribbon of water in the distance, willows bending low over it. "We'll stop there," he said. It wasn't much, just a circle of fire-blackened stones and a patch of flattened grass, but to Rose it looked like paradise. He swung down first, eased Lila and Ben to the ground, then reached up to help her. Her legs buckled the instant her boots hit dirt. He caught her elbow quick. "You okay?" She nodded, but she wasn't. Blood tasted coppery where she'd bitten the inside of her cheek. He didn't press, just tipped his head toward the creek. "Go on. Water's good and clean." She dropped to her knees at the edge, scooping water to her mouth in greedy handfuls. The cold stabbed straight through her gut like a blade. She kept drinking anyway, until her fingers went numb and her lips split. Behind her, Cole had kindled a small fire, just enough for warmth and a thin thread of smoke. He was warming something in a dented tin cup. The kids lay curled on his rolled-up bed tarp, bundled in his heavy coat. "Got some beans," he said when she came back. They ate good. He didn't invite her to sit, but she lowered herself anyway, slow and careful beside the flames. He handed her the cup. The beans were plain, no frills, but they were hot. She ate every bite like it was the finest meal she'd ever tasted. She scraped the last of the beans from the tin, swallowing them down even though they tasted like dust and regret. When she lifted her eyes, Cole was watching her, not gawking, not prying. Just studying her the way a man might try to make out faded lettering on an old signpost. "You come a long way?" he asked, voice quiet. She paused, then answered. "Willow Creek." He gave a short nod. "West of Abner's Mill, yeah?" "That's right." She hugged her arms tight around her ribs. The night wind had teeth now, biting straight through to the marrow. Cole reached for a handful of dry sticks and fed them to the flames. Firelight danced over his face, carving the lines deeper. His beard came in patchy and thin. His hands looked rough. Cracked knuckles, old scars, nails blackened from honest work. "Your husband?" he asked, soft as a prayer. Rose didn't flinch, just dipped her chin once. "Gone since spring 3 years back." She blinked hard. "Your wife?" He let the question hang for a long beat. "Her and the baby. Fever took 'em both." After that, silence settled between them like a heavy quilt. The fire popped and hissed, steady and low. Off in the dark, a nightbird called once. Lonely. Cole finally spoke again. "You headed somewhere particular?" "I thought I was," she said. "Now, I'm not so sure. Anybody waiting on you?" "Nobody." He stared at his palms, turned them over like they belonged to someone else. "I've been riding fence for a rancher up north a ways. Pays slim, but it's peaceful. Got a little shack, couple hens, creek runs clean year-round." "Wasn't much," he added, almost to himself. "Till tonight." She didn't answer. He didn't seem to need her to. The children shifted under the coat, all three bundled close. Ben let out a slow, sleepy sigh and nuzzled deeper into the wool collar. Cole watched them a long while. Then, so quiet it might have been for his own ears alone, he murmured, "I can carry them all." The words drifted off into the night, carried toward whatever storms and silences still waited ahead. Places where hearts get stripped bare and proved real. The fire dwindled to glowing coals. Darkness rolled in thick and final, bringing the kind of cold that sneaks under cuffs and locks knees stiff. Rose scooted closer to the dying embers, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around her shins, chin resting on them. Cole sat opposite, whittling a stick down to nothing with a knife that looked old as the hills. They hadn't traded words since the flames dropped low, since she'd told him her name and a sliver of her story. Something stretched between them now, thin as frayed twine, barely strong enough to hold, but still there. Lila coughed once in her sleep, small and sharp. Cole moved quick but gentle, tugging the coat higher over her shoulder, more tender than most daddies Rose had ever seen. She watched him, throat tight with something she couldn't name. She wasn't used to being seen, or helped, or someone sticking around. The wind swung around, bringing the sharp scent of mesquite smoke and wet earth. Deep in the timber, a coyote threw up a single mournful note, then fell silent. Cole glanced her way. "You ought to try to sleep." She shook her head. "I wouldn't." "Still," he said, flicking the shaved stick into the coals, "staring at shadows won't help." He didn't press, didn't say another word. Just leaned back against his saddle, arms folded, hat tipped low over his eyes. Rose stayed awake another hour, maybe 2. Time didn't matter. She watched the darkness press in around their little circle of light, watched her kids breathe slow and even, and tried to remember what trust even felt like. At last the day's weight pulled her under like a slow river current. Come morning, frost glittered on the blankets, and the horse's mane sparkled with tiny ice crystals. Rose's back screamed from the hard ground, but she pushed herself upright fast. The kids were still out cold, curled up tight like barn cats in winter, all three nestled under Cole's heavy coat. The fire had died to gray ash. Cole was already up and moving. Kneeling at the creek's edge, sleeves rolled to his elbows, he looked like he'd been awake since before first light. When he caught her stirring, he gave a quick nod. "Cornmeal's in the saddlebag. I'll stir up some mush." She rose slow, brushing twigs and leaves from her skirt. "Let me do it." He didn't argue, just eased back on his heels and let her take over. They ate without a word. The mush was thick, plain as dirt, but the children shoveled it in like it was Christmas pie. Cole filled the canteen from the stream. He fashioned a quick rope halter for the horse. He moved with steady purpose, never hurried, like a man who owned his hours but didn't let them own him. Later, while the kids hunted acorns and skipped them across the water, Cole walked beside her along the tree line, pointing out deer tracks, coyote prints, old game trails. He showed her how to read fresh water from the way moss clung to bark, how to taste a leaf for sweetness, how to listen for the chatter of birds that meant clean springs nearby. "You ever think about putting down roots somewhere?" he asked. She kept her gaze on the path ahead. "Never figured I had the right to." He studied her face a long moment. "You do now?" She didn't reply. Over the next few days they kept on, not racing the sun, just steady enough to make ground. When her legs finally buckled, he hoisted Jack up behind Lila on the saddle and carried Ben himself, tucked close against his chest. When she scorched her hand on a hot skillet one evening, he didn't say a word, just tore a strip from his spare shirt and wrapped it tight, steady as stone. She started noticing the small things. He never raised his voice, not once. He always fed the kids before touching his own plate. Sometimes, when he worked, a low, wordless tune hummed under his breath. Nothing pretty, but kind in its way. One night after the children were dreaming, she asked about the scar along his jaw. "Barbed wire," he said, "back when I thought I could outrun a falling gate." She laughed, short, surprised, the first real sound like that in weeks. He smiled, lips closed, eyes crinkling at the corners. "Good to hear. You always this gentle?" "Nope, not always." "What changed?" He glanced at the fire. "Somebody told me once I was built to hold things steady, not tear them apart." "And did you?" He kept his eyes on the flames. "I tried." That night they slept close, not touching, not crowding, just near enough to hear each other breathe in the dark. Morning came. Rose helped him tighten the cinch on the saddle. Her hands still shook now and then, but not as bad. She felt every ache, the burn in her muscles, the raw blisters, the hollow tug of hunger. But underneath it all, something new had taken hold. Not peace, not quite, but the beginning of it. The cabin stood alone, pressed against the curve of a low hill where the wind finally softened. It wasn't much. Grayed boards, roof patched with old canvas, front steps bowed in the middle, one shutter dangling by a lone hinge. But a thin thread of smoke rose from the stovepipe, and the chimney held straight and true. Cole reined in at the edge of the clearing. "That's her." Rose sat behind him, Jack asleep in her lap, warm breath soaking through her dress. Lila gripped the saddle horn tight. Ben stirred against Cole's chest with a tiny, broken sigh. She stared at the little house. It didn't look like safety. It looked like a question hanging in the air. "You live here?" He nodded. "Since spring. Just me." She slid down careful, not wanting to wake Jack, who fussed once and burrowed deeper into her shoulder. Cole passed the others down, then led the horse to the lean-to beside the cabin. Rose stood rooted in the cold dirt, arms full of sleeping child, watching the wind tease brittle weeds around the porch. The front door gave a low creak as it swung open on its own. She stepped inside. The smell hit her first, old ash and sun-dried pine. The room was dim but spotless. A narrow cot against one wall, a cast-iron stove in the corner, a rough table with 2 chairs, one short-legged and braced with a chunk of firewood. Everything plain, but every piece handled with care. He struck a match and lit the lantern. Soft gold light spilled out, chasing shadows into the corners, making the place feel almost kind. "You can take the cot," he said. "I'll bed down in the barn." "You don't have to." He shook his head. "Ain't right otherwise." She wanted to argue, but the words died. Instead, she eased Jack onto the cot and draped her shawl over him. Lila curled up next, one arm thrown protectively across her brother. Cole settled Ben in an old wooden crate lined with wool scraps, knelt to tuck the blanket just so, then stood. He shrugged into his coat. "I'll be close by." She reached for the lantern as he turned. "Cole." He paused in the doorway. "I don't know what any of this is," she said. "But, thank you." His eyes held hers a beat longer than necessary. Then he touched the brim of his hat and stepped out. The door clicked shut, soft behind him. Days slipped by, slow and quiet. Rose swept the plank floor, mended the ragged curtain, hauled creek water to boil for washing. She stitched the littlest shirts and dresses with thread so thin it vanished into the cloth, her fingertips pricking and bleeding now and then. But she never quit. The steady beat of chores was the only thing that kept her steady, kept the ghosts at bay. Cole stuck mostly to the barn, splitting wood till his shirt stuck to his back, mending fence rails, riding out at dawn and coming home at twilight with jerked beef, fresh eggs, or sometimes empty hands. He never crossed the threshold without scraping his boots clean, never raised his voice above a murmur, never once made her feel like she owed him a single thing. The kids warmed to him faster than she did. One morning Jack trailed him out to the barn and came back clutching a handmade slingshot, eyes shining. Lila started tagging along to gather kindling, proud as could be. Even little Ben broke into a gummy grin whenever Cole lifted him high, though he still saved most of his smiles for her alone. It stung a little, but mostly it didn't. One blustery night, when the wind rattled the door like it wanted in, Cole stayed inside instead of heading to the barn. She mixed up cornbread from the flour he'd traded a trapper for, and they sat together at the rickety table, talking only in bits and pieces. When the plates were cleared, he dried while she washed. Standing shoulder to shoulder at the stove, she finally asked, "Why me?" He kept his eyes on the dish towel. "What do you mean?" "Out there on the road, you didn't know us from Adam. No reason to stop." He set the plate down, slow, careful. "You looked like a woman who'd poured out every last drop she had, and it still wasn't enough." Her throat locked up tight. She turned away quick so he wouldn't see the shine in her eyes. Later she found him on the porch in the dark, hat resting in his lap, night air pulling at his collar. She sat down beside him without a word. "You really live out here all by yourself?" she asked. He nodded once. "After they were gone, I couldn't face town. Couldn't stand the way folks looked at me with pity. Out here it's just the work, day in, day out." She thought of her own ghosts. Will swept away in the flood, her folks gone before she turned 20. The long, quiet years, the empty Sunday pews, the church women whispering behind gloved hands. "You miss it?" she asked. "The people? The noise? Any of it?" He stared at his hands. They trembled just a little. "Every damn day." She didn't know what to say to that, so she reached over and took one of those rough hands in both of hers, held on tight. He let her. Winter crept in slow, quiet as a man slipping off his boots so he wouldn't wake the house. Frost climbed the window panes at night. Their breath hung white in the morning light. Cole stacked the woodpile higher every week. Rose learned how to bank the stove just right. Keep it glowing through the long, black hours without smothering it or letting it die. The children, wrapped in wool and patched quilts, turned finding the sunniest patch of floor into a game. Usually it was that one corner where a slant of midday light hit for a precious hour. They were starting to remember how to be kids again. Rose moved through her days like someone who'd walked through fire and still carried the faint smell of smoke on her skin. She showed Lila how to thread a needle using scraps of burlap. Jack learned to haul a bucket of water without sloshing more than half. Ben took his first wobbly steps, arms flung out like wings. One morning he looked right at her and said, "Ma," clear as day. She froze mid-stir, wooden spoon dripping in her hand. That night she sat beside Cole at the stove while the kids slept. The quiet between them wasn't heavy anymore. It had room to breathe, a shape they both recognized. "You never asked where I was headed," she said. He kept his gaze on the flames, waiting. "Before you found us, I was aiming for Wichita. Figured maybe there'd be work, a fresh start." "You'd have made it," he said. "No, I wouldn't have." He turned his head just enough to meet her eyes. She folded her hands in her lap. "I wasn't honest before. I did have a brother once, down in Cottonwood Falls. He wrote me before Ben was born. Told me flat out not to come. Said he couldn't take us in." Cole's jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet. "I was going anyway," she went on. "That desperate. That mad." She braced for judgment. It never came. After a long breath, Cole said, "Folks only show who they really are when there's nothing left to hide behind." "You think I showed mine?" He looked down at her hands, red and rough from scrubbing, then up to her face, stronger now, etched with new lines of grit. "I think you've been real since the second I saw you trying to carry all three of them on your own." The stove popped. Wind shoved at the walls, but the fire held strong. "I didn't think I could," she whispered. "Didn't know I had it in me." "You did. You still do." Outside, snow started to fall. Soft, steady, no sound at all. Cole rose and eased the door open just a crack. Fat flakes drifted straight down, heavy and silent. No wind to scatter them. He stepped onto the porch, boots crunching through fresh powder. Rose followed close behind. The whole clearing looked like a painting come to life. Fence posts capped in white, barn roof gleaming soft under moonlight, trees bowing low beneath the weight of silence. "You ever think about staying?" he asked. "I mean for real, not just till spring thaws out." Rose turned to him, face stripped bare by the cold and the moment. "I'd need more than a roof over our heads," she said. "More than just kindness." He gave one slow nod. "I can give more." "I don't want a savior," she told him. "I ain't one," Cole answered. "But I got two strong hands and I know how to use them to build something solid." She took a half step closer. "I don't want to be a burden." "You ain't," he said, voice low and sure. "You're the reason this place feels alive again." Snowflakes settled on his broad shoulders, caught in her eyelashes like tiny stars. He lifted a hand and brushed one flake from her cheek. Gentle, like it was something rare he didn't want to lose. "You sure?" she whispered. His voice never wavered. "I can carry them all." She leaned in, resting her forehead against his. Right there on the sagging porch of a weathered cabin buried in the woods, something deep inside both of them shifted. Not with noise or lightning, but with the steady, quiet certainty of two people who'd finally stopped running. By midwinter they'd found a rhythm that fit like an old pair of boots. Cole chopped wood at first light, hauled the split logs to the shed, always setting aside the smaller pieces for the stove Rose tended. She cooked from what little they had: salt pork and beans simmered slow, biscuits without butter, cornbread laced with molasses he'd bartered from a passing trapper. It wasn't feast food, but it filled bellies and warmed bones through the long nights. The kids started to bloom again. Lila quit flinching in her sleep. Jack's laughter came sudden and loud, surprising even himself. Little Ben took his first real steps one afternoon, arms wide like wings, legs pumping unsteady from Rose's hold straight into Cole's waiting hands. Cole caught him with a big, open grin and didn't bother hiding the tears that slipped down his cheeks. Rose watched and kept quiet. Some moments were too big for words. They started touching more, not out of want, but out of simple, quiet need. A steady hand on a shoulder, fingers brushing in passing. She learned the feel of him by the way he handed her a tool she hadn't even asked for, or how he went still whenever she laughed, like the sound was something worth holding on to. He never pushed, never hurried her. Not even that one night after the kids were tucked in, when she stood by the stove in her worn nightgown, hands clasped tight in front of her. "You ever wonder what it'd be like?" she asked. He looked up from his chair. "What?" "This, a real life, with somebody." He straightened a little but stayed seated. "Used to. Then I quit. Didn't figure I'd ever earn it again." She took a step forward. "You've earned it." His throat worked hard once. "Don't say it if you don't mean it." "I wouldn't be standing here if I didn't." The space between them closed, not in a rush of heat, but with the slow weight of real things. Her palm flattened against his chest. His arms came around her waist. They didn't kiss, not yet. They just held on, two people who knew exactly how much it hurt to lose. By the time the first green shoots pushed through, the cabin had changed. Rose had scrubbed the walls till the pine glowed again and hung fresh curtains she'd pieced from scraps. Cole built a second cot and slid it next to the first so the kids wouldn't pile on top of her at night. They put in a patch of cabbage out back. He showed her how to repair harness leather and split kindling clean without shattering it. She taught him how to listen to a baby's cough, deep or shallow, and how to feel for fever in small cheeks. They weren't lovers yet, but what they had ran deeper than that. One evening as the sun dropped low and gold across the clearing, Lila came running up from the creek, clutching something in her fist. "Found this," she said, breathless. "First one I've seen." It was a tiny purple flower, already crumpled from her grip. Rose knelt down. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Rose said. Lila's face lit up like sunrise. "Can we keep it?" Cole crouched down behind her, peering at the tiny bloom in her small fist. "Let's dry it out," he said. "Press it between the pages of the Bible." Lila tilted her head, brow wrinkled. "Why the Bible?" Cole glanced up at Rose, eyes soft. "So we never forget the first real sign that spring's finally here." Rose watched him, her chest swelling with something warm and unfamiliar. That night they sat out on the porch again. The air still carried a bite, but it no longer cut to the bone. A gentle southern breeze drifted in, carrying hints of thaw. "Got word from town," Cole said. "Sheriff Hank Dobbs is looking for somebody to help with a land claim. Might need a man to speak up, file the right papers. You gonna do it?" "Been thinking on it." "You don't care much for town." "No," he admitted. "But if I'm gonna put real roots down here, I want it to be more than just patched up roofs and quiet favors." She leaned against his shoulder. "You're already building it." He wrapped his hand around hers. "I don't know what's coming next, Rose. I ain't got one of those big plans most fellas carry around." "You don't need plans." He turned to face her fully. "Then what do you need?" She looked at him. really looked, and saw the man who'd shouldered her whole broken family when she couldn't take another step. The man who never demanded more than she had to give, yet gave everything anyway. "I need to know you won't walk out that door one day and not come back." "I'd die first." She nodded once, sharp and sure. "Then that's enough." He leaned in slow. This time their kiss was gentle, certain, like a promise spoken low in the glow of a dying fire. In that still moment, with the children dreaming safe behind the walls, the trees murmuring of coming green, and one small pressed flower waiting between old pages, Rose understood. Their life together had already begun. Spring broke all at once, mud everywhere, ice cracking apart, the raw, tender force of everything coming back to life. Creeks rose fast, tugging at their banks. Birds flooded back into the branches like they'd only stepped away for a minute. Fresh grass speared up through the last crust of frost. Calves bawled somewhere farther up the valley, and Cole's horse lifted its head, ears flicking toward the sound. Mornings, Rose threw open the cabin windows. Fresh air swept through the rooms, stirring quilts, brushing past pots and pans, touching the small, growing bodies of her children. The smell of new-turned earth and pine, mixed with last year's wood smoke, filled every crack and corner. Sometimes she just stood in the doorway, letting the breeze trace her face. Cole was up on the barn roof, shirt off in the strengthening sun, sweat carving clean tracks down his back. The old scar along his jaw caught the light, pale against tanned skin. Lila and Jack watched him from below, mesmerized, mimicking his hammer swings with sticks in the dirt and calling it fixin'. Even Ben started copying, grunting tiny grunts when he lifted anything, throwing his little shoulders forward like a draft horse in harness. The sound pulled a deep, rolling laugh out of Cole's chest, a noise that hadn't rung out in years. They lived that way. Not easy, not polished, but honest and real. Some nights Rose still jolted awake from bad dreams, fists balled, jaw locked tight. Cole never spoke, just drew her close against him and held on until her breathing evened out. Once he told her healing wasn't a straight line. It curved and doubled back, sometimes looped so tight you thought you'd never get free. She told him she didn't care what shape the road took, long as he walked it beside her. On a bright Sunday morning late in March, Rose stood on the porch in her best pressed dress, hair neatly pinned. The sky stretched clear and wide. The air nipped sharp at the skin. Cole stepped out behind her, collar scrubbed fresh, boots polished for the first time in months. "You ready?" he asked. She looked down at her hands. They still carried the old scars. Burns, cuts, stains time couldn't wash away. But they held steady now. "Yes," she said. They rode to town together in a borrowed wagon, a solid 2-hour haul. The kids sat in the back with a basket of fresh cornbread and wildflowers Lila had picked and insisted on bringing. Rose watched the countryside slide by. Those same hills that once looked harsh and never-ending now felt like a fence line around something precious worth holding on to. The courthouse sat plain and sturdy at the edge of the square. When Cole pushed the door open, the clerk, Elias Gray, glanced up, startled. "Can I help you folks?" "Yes," Cole said. "We'd like to file for recording land rights and a marriage certificate." The clerk blinked. "Both at once?" "Both at once," Rose said, stepping up beside him. They signed with pens the clerk loaned them, her name flowing even and sure, his slower, deliberate. The children stayed quiet as mice in church until the last line was done. Then Jack piped up. "Does this mean we're staying?" Cole scooped him up high. "It means we're building." They held the wedding under the big tree behind the cabin, right as the first green buds were breaking. No preacher, no crowd, just the 5 of them. the wind moving through the branches and the good dark earth underfoot. Cole took her hands in his, rough calluses against rough calluses, and spoke low. I give you everything I've got. These hands, this ground, my name, my word. I'll carry you when you're worn out, and I ain't ever walking away. She met his eyes straight on. I've known real loss. I've known the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones and stays. But with you, I hear life again. I'm not scared of whatever road's ahead. I'll walk it with you, and I'll carry you if I have to. Then Lila stepped forward and placed the flower between their joined hands. The same small purple one she'd found months back, now dried and pressed thin as lace. They knelt together and buried it at the tree's roots. Years later, when new little ones raced laughing through the yard and the cabin had grown extra rooms, sturdy walls, and rows of garden out back, Rose would rest her palm against that same tree trunk and remember the day everything changed. Not with noise or storm, but with quiet strength, with love built not on fancy words, but on ordinary days stacked one after another. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice, imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.